Hello everybody, my name is Leo and this video could be considered part 5 of my series about the latency of amp modeling pedalboards. Links to the previous videos in the description below. This new video is all about the latency of the Ampero Stomp II, as many of you have requested. Actually, after my 23 amp modeling pedalboards latency test, Ampero has released a firmware upgrade dedicated also to the latency. Therefore, we will check out if the Ampero Stomp II has really improved. Let's start! In my 23 amp modeling pedalboard latency test, the Ampero reached almost 10 milliseconds of latency using internal cabinet and 5.6 milliseconds using IRs. Since that video, Ampero has released a new firmware upgrade where in the release notes there is written optimized system latency when using less effects modules. Therefore, I think that Ampero has maybe seen our previous video and has decided to try to improve the performance of the unit, which is great. First of all, because it testifies that Ampero always try to improve their units, and also that they are listening to us and our community, which is great. Coming to the today test, we will check out the latency without anything in the signal chain to verify basically how long does it take for the ADA conversion to take place. Then we will add an amp block, then a cab block, then a wah-wah, then an overdrive, and then we will also add time effects, more specifically a delay and a reverb, that are typically the effects that take more processing power. Finally, we will also check out what happens to latency when we use the effect loop. For all these tests, we are gonna use a Fender Deluxe Reverb amp. Let's go straight to the results. We have an empty chain that takes 3 milliseconds, therefore we can deduce that the ADA conversion takes around 3 milliseconds. With an amp only in the signal chain, we have a little bit more than 3 milliseconds, where with only a cab in the signal chain and the amp switched off, we have 7.8 milliseconds. With both the amp and the cab activated, we have a little bit more than 7.8 milliseconds. Therefore, here we can say that, first of all, the cab takes a lot of processing power. I think that Ampero has invested a lot in the cab emulation algorithm in order to obtain a good tone, and that's maybe the reason why it takes so much processing power. Second deduction is that Ampero has already made some improvement, as in my previous video, in my previous test, the latency with the cab was around 10 milliseconds. If instead of the cab we use an IR, the latency of the amp plus IR blocks goes to 3.2 milliseconds instead of 7.8 of the amp plus cab. So the IR is much more efficient. Furthermore, in my previous test, the amp plus IR took 5.6 milliseconds. Therefore, also here, Ampero has improved the latency. Very nice. Now we will continue our tests keeping the amp and the IR in the chain. Adding a wah-wah, basically the latency does not change, and if we add a tube screamer, maintaining the wah-wah activated, the latency reaches 5 milliseconds. Therefore, we can say that a tube screamer takes alone almost 1.8 milliseconds. That surprised me a little bit, as it takes more than the amp blocks, which should be more complicated in terms of algorithm and processing power. So maybe here there is room for improvements. Let's now talk about time effects like reverb and delays. Well, with an amp, an IR and a delay, it stays at 3.2 milliseconds, where if instead of the delay we use the reverb, we reach 5 milliseconds. And you have 5 milliseconds also with both the reverb and the delay. Therefore here the delay basically does not impact the latency, where the reverb takes 1.8 milliseconds, exactly like the aforementioned tube screamer. With everything together in the signal chain, basically the latency does not change too much and stays around 5 milliseconds. I have also checked out the effect loop. I have connected a very short cable in the effect loop of the Ampero in order to test the latency of the effect loop without any other external pedal connected. Obviously, if you add an external pedal in the loop, you need to add also the latency of that pedal. Well, with the effect loop activated in the signal chain, with just an amp and a cab, the latency does not change too much, which surprised me a little bit, as I expected to have a round trip for the 88 conversion to sum up to the latency. Maybe the basic latency of the 88 conversion without anything in the signal chain already includes the conversion for the effect loop. I don't know, but this is for sure a good result and very different versus the camper, where we have measured 7 milliseconds of latency just adding the effect loop to the chain. In conclusion, I would summarize this test with 3 takeaways. First of all, I'm pretty happy and proud of our community, as I think that the new firmware of the Ampero 2 is a consequence of our previous latency test, and testify that Ampero is listening and is able to extract value from our videos and your comments and opinions. So thank you. Second, I would say that with an IR, the Ampero Stomp 2 has now very good latency values. Third, the cab block is still taxing the latency like no other effect block in the chain, but it has been improved with the last firmware upgrade, and maybe the quality of the cab block is really so good that is taxing a lot the DSP. Now, I'm really curious to hear your opinions. Do you have experienced any latency problem with Ampero? What do you think about the latency improvement done after our initial latency test? Please let me know in the comment section below your precious and valuable opinions, and for which other modelers you want me to do a deep dive of the latency performances. We have now reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did it, please subscribe to my channel, ring the bell and leave a thumb up. It would be of great help. If you're interested in my IRs or in my camper profiles, you can check out the link in the card above or description below, where there is also a link to a playlist of songs of mine. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon in the next videos. Bye bye.